Today we are going to start out by doing a quick overview of what Selenium is. Now, whenever I say Selenium, you should always think Selenium Webdriver project. They're one and the same. The original project name was Selenium, and then about 3, maybe 4 years ago now, they acquired the Webdriver project. So it's basically the same thing. They're synonyms. We're going to start by installing and learning how to use Selenium IDE. Selenium IDE, IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, and it's just basically a fancy way of saying a recorder and script playback. So today, what we're going to do is we are going to learn how to use it. We're going to learn some very basics of automation. And by the end, when you leave this class, you'll have your first test case done. So you'll have your first automation, you'll have your first homework, and you'll know how to automate. So you'll leave knowing how to automate stuff. In fact, I'll show you a little trick that you can do, that you can actually take the stuff that you record in Selenium IDE, and you'll be able to export it as Python or Java or whatever it is that you desire, so you can actually write code by the end of this class. There's a magical capability that will let you output actual code that you can play back, which is pretty cool. Day 2, we're going to get a little bit more intensely into Selenium commands. We're also going to talk about matching text. I don't know, most of you have probably know what an asterisk means, like globbing, right? If you ever used any kind of command line tool. But not a lot of people are familiar with regular expressions, so we're going to be talking a lot about regular expressions. Regular expressions are useful for automation whenever you have a lot of data and you need to extract stuff from the page, or when you are not sure of what kind of data you're going to get, like you have a general idea, like I know I'm going to get a 16-digit alphanumerical code, right? But you need to assert that you got it. You need to check that you got it, right? But it's always different. But it's always 16 digits, and it's always alphanumeric. Like, how do you describe that? Well, you use regular expressions. So we're going to learn regular expressions. We're going to learn more Selenium IDE commands. I'll give you a very quick overview of everything you can do in Selenium/Webdriver. Day 3, we're going to talk more about HTML. If you know HTML, great. I'm not going to bore you with 3 hours of look at this tag means something or other. The reason we're going to talk about HTML is because we're going to be talking about locators, and that's how Selenium, it's how Selenium is able to find the things you see on the web page, right? So you can't just say Selenium, hey, go find a button. That's not really how Selenium understands things. Instead, it understands one of the following 3 methods. So it understands either IDs and names, it understands CSS, and it understands XPath. And if I'm completely honest, IDs and names are actually part of CSS, so it really understands just CSS and XPath. It also understands DOM. I don't know if anybody knows what DOM is. Anyways, there's another way of describing items on the page besides HTML, but it's not really used that often, so we're not really going to be covering it. The only time you might want to cover it is if you actually ever decide to implement your own commands in WebDriver, which I don't think is going to happen for most of you until you're advanced. So if you ever go that direction and you decide to implement your own custom commands in WebDriver, then we can talk about DOM. Day 4, we are going to start kind of slowly getting into scripting. All right, now this course is taught in Python. Python is a weakly typed language, and so is JavaScript. In fact, everything I teach you in JavaScript will be directly translatable to Python. I mean, they're pretty much, okay, maybe they're not 1-to-1, but they're like 98% to 1. Even though we're going to be learning JavaScript and we're going to be learning how to inject JavaScript through Selenium in our code, essentially the next week, everything I told you about JavaScript will also apply to Python. So it's kind of like a twofer. It's 2 birds with 1 stone. I know that sounds sadistic. I'm sorry, animal lovers. Last class, somebody was like, that's mean. I'm sorry. It's an expression. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I'm not trying to teach you JavaScript. It is a good idea to understand a little bit of JavaScript, especially because once you go into the advanced course, or once you go into your job and you start doing your automation job, you'll find there are situations where simple WebDriver, just directly WebDriver, won't handle certain situations, and you actually will need to do these fancy workarounds where you actually do have to use JavaScript injection during your test run to make elements actually accessible and visible. That's what we're going to get to do. We're going to talk about variables, loops, objects. I do not expect you to know what any of those are. However, we do spend only like one or two classes on it. So you should definitely on your own either afterwards follow up and learn it, or even now start kind of maybe learning a little bit about Python so you understand what it is. What the emphasis of this class is to teach you Selenium Webdriver. It's not to teach you Python. You can't learn Python in 10 weeks plus everything else along the way. So yeah, definitely I encourage you on your own to go and do a tutorial. You don't have to become a programmer in Python to be able to do this, but you need to know at least some basic knowledge. Like you need to be able to know how to define a function, what a function is, right? What a variable is. Just some very, very basic things. And we.
Do you need to know the costs or other like the?
You don't really need another class. Like I said, you don't need to become a pro, but a little bit of extra practice on the side honestly won't hurt you. All right, so I do encourage it. We will cover all of it in class, but it's going to be like this, a condensed version. So it's probably a lot more helpful for you to have your own leisure and to learn it in a more spread out way. Okay, day 5. Day 5 is when we start installing Pycharm. Pycharm is a Python IDE. So you heard me say IDE before, right? When I said Selenium IDE. So Selenium has its own little tool, right, for creating Selenium scripts. And Python has many, many applications for creating Python scripts. And one of them is Pycharm. Now, the cool thing about Pycharm is that it comes in a free and commercial version. We're going to be using a free version, so it's free. But it's a very, very nice IDE. It does code completion. What does that mean? It means when you type, it tries to guess what you're trying to type, and it fills in the rest for you. Similarly, if you are using a specific object and you don't know what does this object do? Like, how do I use it? You just say dot space, and it gives you all the options. So you can kind of guess and peek and look at the definitions. So it's just a very helpful tool. And I'm going to show you how to convert all of the Selenium test case we created until day 5 into Python and how to run them. And we're going to learn how to use Python and then also probably do some scripting as well along the way. Day 6 is when we start talking about Python and WebDriver. So officially after day 5, we no longer use Selenium IDE, and I'll come back and talk about that in a second. We will completely switch into using Python and WebDriver. So to answer the previous question, WebDriver is, without using technical words, it's essentially a contract, right? It's a set of rules. That's what it is. It's a set of rules that can be implemented using any language to allow automation of web applications. And that's essentially what a WebDriver is. There's many, many different implementations of WebDriver. So if you decide that you want to automate a web page in Java, there's going to be a Java WebDriver implementation, all right? So a Java client. And then if you decide you want to do it in Python, then there's going to be a Python version, Python implementation of the WebDriver contract. And then if you decide to do it in JavaScript, there's actually like 5 different implementations. So you can actually pick and choose, because JavaScript is a little iffy. I don't know if you guys know that, but there's Node.js, and then there's, I'm totally blanking out right now, Angular, is that correct? Angular? So again, just there's 2, and then Node.js by itself has like 4 or 5, so there's so many implementations. And Ruby has its own, and PHP has its own, and Perl has its own. So everybody has their own implementation of this contract, of this set of rules. And what we're going to be learning is we're going to be learning the Python implementation of the WebDriver. All right, and the very, very exciting part about this set of rules that's called WebDriver is that because it's a set of rules, if you decide to ever switch to a different language, you don't have to relearn WebDriver. I mean, literally the difference between, here, I'll show you, the difference between a Python WebDriver command and a Java WebDriver command is minute. For example, in Python, you might say something like find element, right? And then you'll give directions. But in Java, you will say find uppercase element. Right? So Python, Java. Not a huge difference, right? This one is all lowercase with an underscore, and this one has an uppercase letter in the middle and no underscore. That's the difference. They're exactly the same, except for the case. So once you learn this in Python, this package, that's what it's called. It's a Python package, all right? And you decide to go to Java at some point in your career, you don't have to relearn everything. You will just be using a Java package, but the commands are going to be more or less the same. Okay?
Which one is the more popular, Java or Python?
It depends on the time. I think it even depends on the time of the year. Like in the winter, more Java. In the summer, more Python. I don't know. It's just lots of JavaScript inquiries lately. So I don't know. I think if you're an architect, like a developer architect, it matters which language you write in. But I think on our level, like a QE test developer level, it's very similar regardless of which language. So just learn one well, right? Just one well. And then if you ever have opportunity to write in a different language, you'll find that within 2-3 weeks you'll be able to switch. It's not like a horrible, horrible thing. Python is easy to learn, yeah. Switching from Python to Java is a lot harder than from Java to Python. Let's just throw that out there as well. So if you're going to learn a language and you have a whole bunch of time, start with Java. If you're going to learn a language and you have minimum amount of time, start with Python, and then Java is kind of a beast you'll tackle later. What were we talking about? Yes, so everybody understands what a WebDriver is? Cool. And of course, this is essentially when I'm going to be talking more about Python, and I'm going to be talking about built-in functions in Python and how to loop in Python and how to do all this fancy, not so fancy stuff in Python. Basics. Now, let's again talk about what a package is, because I don't want people to be confused. Python is a lot of packages. Think of Python, actually that's what it's called. It's a library, all right? Python, it's a library. There's a whole bunch of books. WebDriver is one book in a library, all right? Just one. So obviously, when you install Python, there's going to be a whole bunch of other books you might want to know and you will use, and I don't think anybody knows all of them, in all honesty, and I don't expect you to know all of them. But there are, however, some that are kind of core, like, that all of us have to learn. And those are the ones I'm going to be somewhat covering in the introduction to Python. More Python basics, more Python not so basics. We're going to talk about creating functions, creating modules, creating classes, creating test cases from scratch. On day 8, we're going to talk about test units. So here's another confusing language mixing of terminology that happens in the industry. When you start looking for work, you'll have recruiters and employers asking you, do you have experience building out a framework, right? And at the same time, when I talk about things like test unit, right, also known as PyUnit, by the way, they're the same thing, I'm going to say it's a test framework. So I'm using the same word, framework and framework, but I'm referring to two completely different concepts, all right? And in fact, the way I'm going to be using the word framework when I refer to test unit is more correct than when your recruiters or potential employers will be asking you to using that word, okay? A framework is a incomplete application. What does that mean? It means it's kind of like an Xbox. How many game players we have here? Like, or I don't know, maybe not an Xbox. Basically, it's kind of like a game console, right? And you just have to plug in the last piece to make it work. Does that make sense? It's already a working system, but without that last piece, it just kind of sits there. Doesn't do anything. It's working, but it doesn't do anything. If you want it to work, you plug in that last piece. Does that make sense? You take it out, you plug in another one, oh, it works completely differently now. A whole different picture on the screen, right? A whole different set of steps. But that's what a framework is. And that is what a test unit framework is, all right? Test unit framework is something that already knows how to run your test, how to collect results, how to report on those results, how to generate all kinds of, data for you, where to start, where to end, what to run after what, right? That's what a test framework does. Make sense? And that's what it's a tool that's already somebody developed for us, somebody very, very, very smart and debugged and improved, and we're going to learn to use it. when recruiters call you and ask you if you know how to build out a test framework, they do not mean that you need to be able to actually be one of the people on the test unit team or JUnit team or I don't know, test NG team. What they're talking about is, do you know how to structure your test cases once you write them? So you automate 100 test cases, right? Do you know how to structure them in the file system? That's what they're talking about. And they're asking you, do you know how to efficiently reuse your code? Like you're looking, you have one test case and other test cases. Oh, 20% of them are the same. Maybe I should take that 20% and create a function, right? That's what they're asking you. So don't get confused. We're going to be learning how to use the test unit framework. We're going to talk a little bit about how to reuse code, but just know that that word is used in two different contexts differently. Okay? Everybody understands both usages?
I didn't understand that, but I understood what you're saying. I don't understand what
They're saying,
are they asking us if we are going to be the one of the people who actually writes the framework, the code for the framework?
writes the automation code. I wouldn't say for the framework. That's exactly, if they're asking you if you are able and willing to make a decision about into which folder to put your automated test cases and about which functions to create to use in your automated test cases, which is a whole lot easier than creating this kind of test framework. So they're not asking you something huge and scary. They're actually asking you something very simple. Can you make a simple decision about what folder to put your file in? All right, so just so we have it out there. So for most of you, I think, yeah, you'll be good. We also, at this point, I'm going to start torturing you a little bit, and I'm going to have to write stuff from scratch. So up until now, we've used Selenium IDE. We accumulated a whole bunch of test cases. We just export them and edit them, export them and edit them. But at this point, I'm going to actually force you to create a blank file and type everything from scratch. Why? At some point during an interview, somebody might sit you down in front of a blank computer and say, create me a simple test case to log into this application, right? And you need to be able to do it without Selenium IDE. Okay, day 9, WebDriver by itself is actually multiple packages. I lied. I told you it was 1. Okay, it's not really 1. It's 4. So besides WebDriver, there's also WebDriver wait, there's expected conditions, and there's action chains. And so we're basically, oh, and there's also select, I guess. Okay, fine, 4.5. So basically, we're just going to finish talking about all the other little pieces, all right? And this is actually a pretty small piece. This is a larger piece that lets you do all of the advanced things like drag and drop or mouse over something, right? So instead of clicking, you just want to move your mouse there and hang out, not do anything, just kind of hang. All right, managing resources. This is where we start talking about, I hate using the word framework, about the framework in the context of a recruiter. How about I'll say that, all right? So basically, we'll kind of discuss why you would put some functions inside here, why you might want to structure your code in this way, why you might want to structure your code in that way. All right, what are the benefits? What are the not so good things about it? Most of the time, though, you guys, I'm going to be honest with you, there's no pure system. It's a mix of everything. People just go, ah, and it's done. It's alive. All right. Yes?
Can you please repeat the first two WebDriver units that you called? The two of them are here. There are two more.
So there's WebDriver wait, there's WebDriver, there's action chains, there's expected conditions, and then there's, I guess, select. I don't count select. It's like, it's a half. I'll count it as a half.
Wait, like time? Like I'm waiting for something?
Yes. Yes. Day 10 is all these little odds and ends that we don't get to cover during the other days of the class. It's also a good day where if you accumulated questions or there's something else you really, really want me to stuff into the class, you let me know in advance and I just kind of get it in there. All right, but also we're going to talk about generating sample data. Up until this day, I'm going to make you manually create code to actually create data for yourself. But then on day 10, I'll take pity on you and I'll show you a nice package you can install and it will do all of this awesome stuff for you. Because yeah, I'm sadistic like that. And then I'm going to also talk to you about switching between frames and windows. Most of you understand the concept of switching between windows. Most of you have never heard of frames. We will talk about frames during this class at some point before day 10, but on day 10 we'll actually use an example where I'll show you why you need to do it. And I think everybody understands why they might want to switch between windows, right? So you click a button, a new window opens up. What's next? Well, in WebDriver, you have to explicitly say, WebDriver, I know you're on window A, but now I really want you to look at window B, right? Until you say that explicitly, WebDriver stays on window A. You can open up as many windows as you want. WebDriver says, I'm happy here, I'm good. You're good, I'm good. Checking element location and size. So there are situations where you will have something like this come to you. So you're at work, and a person says to you, and a person comes to you and says, we need you to write a test case that checks that this banner is on the top left side of the window, top left of the window. And it comes to, it's one of those situations where like, well, what is top and what is left, and how do you determine it, and then how do you check that the actual element is there? Because what you will learn throughout this course is when WebDriver or Selenium ID looks for an element, it doesn't look by coordinates. It looks by relationships, right? So or by properties. So basically, what am I saying? I'm saying it looks for, so it needs to be inside a second cell of the third row of the, I don't know, fourth table on the page. That's how it looks. It doesn't look like, oh, it has to be, 60 pixels down and 300 pixels across. But what if you actually need to check that something is 300 down and 60 across, right? What do you do? And that's what I mean by this. Location and size. Or how do you check that something is exactly 420 pixels, right? How do you do that, right? So that's what we talk about on day 10. And then some other odds and ends. We'll have a course summary. We'll have Q&A. So gather your questions for day 10. This is a point where you can ask me any kind of interview questions. There is a disclaimer though. I'll give you the answer I would give during the interview. I do not guarantee that it's 100% correct because I can only make my best guess.